Hello, I'm Keith Spera from NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune. Welcome to Let's Talk. My guest today made his Broadway debut 30 years ago, originating the title role of The Who's Tommy. He's since won 2 Tony Awards for Best Actor in a Musical. He also has a long list of TV credits, including The Good Wife, The Blacklist, Treme, and the Fox series Fringe, on which he played an observer named September. He lives part-time in New Orleans, where he founded and fronts an Americana band called Loose Cattle. Here to talk about some of that is Michael Cerveris. Michael, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Now, I had to qualify it, talking about some of it, because you cannot talk about your TV roles at the moment. You are a member of the Screen Actors Guild, American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, the Actors Union, which, as we tape this, is on strike and has been for several months now. And one of the provisions of that is that its members are not allowed to talk about their TV work. Right. When you first told me that, I was a little stunned. I'm like, what? How can they not allow their members to talk about the work they've done? But there's a logic to it. Explain what that logic is.
Well, one of the things that people don't realize, and I think to some extent the studios may not have realized, is how much actors contribute to the promotion of the work that they have done. And it can be as big as going on a press junket, and it can be as seemingly trivial as posting things on Instagram and stuff. But we all know that has maybe as much effect on people's awareness of things as big ad campaigns. So I think the idea from the union is that we are not going to be, helping to further the income or the awareness of work that was done under that particular contract until we have a fair and equitable deal. So it looked like we were headed to that soon up until yesterday. Now it looks a little further away, but in the meantime, that means we really are not doing anything that in any way is sort of promoting that work, even if it's work that was done years and years ago, because that work is still out there being streamed and is popping up on different networks and things all the time. So.
That's right. So even though that work is part of your personal history, you're part of this bigger group that is advocating for what you guys think is more equitable pay and a bigger share of the money being generated by your work. So.
And also the very big issue of AI and its place in our industry, which is an unknown, uncertain future, but it's something that seems to need to be addressed now rather than letting the genie out of the box, as if it isn't already, and then figuring out how to deal with it. So.
Has the strike, like I said, we're 3 months in now, something like that, to the Actors Union strike. Has it cost you work? I mean, were there things you were supposed to be working on that you weren't?
Yeah, there was a show that I was doing that we had finished the second season of, and in theory would have been back to work long ago now. That is not happening. And then any number of things that might have happened in the meantime that I would have been auditioning for at least. And I haven't worked since December of 22.
Haven't worked?
Period. Yeah.
No, really, no theatrical stuff either. Since
no.
Okay.
No. So it's part of that may have been because I wasn't, in theory, going to be available for a lot of theater things for a while because I was on hold still, which is another one of the things that's being addressed, hopefully, in the negotiations. The streaming entities, because the way they put content out, although I hate using that word for what we do.
The way they put your art out.
Yes.
Yes, the way they put your art out.
Is so different from the original model of the networks, where you did 26 episodes, you knew it was a seasonal thing, so they all started at the same time, they finished at the same time. You could count on when you were going to have hiatus time in between. You could tell when you would be told when you would be back to work for the next season, if you would be back.
Right.
And streaming just undid all of that because they put shows on whenever they feel like it, and they take them off whenever they feel like it. And it can be, as fans of shows know, it can be maddeningly long between seasons sometimes.
Right.
I know that as a fan of shows too. And so that means what what seemed like a really good paycheck for a certain amount of time then has to last you for a couple of years sometimes, because you're on hold and you're obligated to be available for them, so you're limited in what other work you can do.
Right.
And you just have to sit there, and you're not being paid for that time generally. So that's a real difficult thing. So for the first part of the year, that was the situation. I was just on hold with the expectation that I was going back to work for the people I was already working for.
For the TV show. For
yeah.
a TV show, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And then that didn't happen. So so I've been just treading water ever since. And the theater has been going through a lot of change, and some very necessary, important change. Some change that's been brought about by the pandemic and the reluctance of people to make plans in advance or go out and do things. So it's a tough time in so many places, but in the acting and entertainment world, for sure.
Yeah, no, the landscape has shifted. Streaming has shifted, TV production, and as you say, Broadway is shifting as well. So there's a lot going on.
Right.
You can't talk about your TV stuff, so let's shift to something you can talk about. Your membership in Skull and Bones at Yale.
Yeah, I can tell more about that than that.
Yes, the famously secretive society.
Yeah, I'm supposed to get up and leave the room now, but
rumor has it you were in it. Yes, you were in Skull and Bones.
Yeah.
Let's go back biographically. So yes, you did go to Yale and you studied
undergrad.
Undergrad, right? Studied theatrical.
Well, Yale didn't. At least when I was there, Yale didn't consider the theater to be a sufficiently academic discipline. So there wasn't a major in the theater. So my degree is in the humanities with an emphasis in theater studies. But I went to Yale largely because I applied to a whole bunch of different schools, everything from conservatories to liberal arts schools, and in the end decided that I didn't want to go to a conservatory where all I was going to do was work on acting and theater. I wasn't entirely certain that was what I wanted to do with my life, and I'd grown up as the son of parents who had met at Juilliard. My dad was a pianist and my mom was a modern dancer, and they both chose not to have performing careers and went into academia, and so I had a healthy regard for what the challenges were of a life as a performer. So I wasn't entirely sure that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to go to a place where I would get a full, well-rounded education no matter what. And I also sort of thought, if I do decide to pursue a career as an actor, I want to know other kinds of people than just other people doing acting and dance and the arts.
Right. You don't want to be in that bubble entirely. I mean,
yeah.
You wanted to have some.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I had more interests and more things to explore, and I explored all of those through my 4 years at Yale. And at the end of it, I sort of came to the realization that I didn't have any greater aptitude or interest in anything else, although I was interested in a lot of different things. So I thought, well, I'll just go to New York and see how it goes, and if it doesn't work out, I'll go back to school and pursue one of the other things that were interesting to me at the time. And my career since then has basically been getting almost to the edge of leaving the business any number of times, basically thinking that every job is my last job, and and one day you'll be right.
One day, yes.
But never quite giving it up altogether, and then being really fortunate too that a lot of my work paid off eventually.
Right. Yeah. Something always came up. So your Broadway debut, as I said in the intro, was
30 years ago.
30 years ago.
Yeah, that was a little shocking to hear out loud, but yeah.
But it's true.
But yeah.
And you originated the role of Tommy, the Who from the Who's rock opera Tommy,
right.
The musical version of that on Broadway. You originated that role, which is a pretty intense role, I would imagine.
Yeah. It was,
what do you recall about preparing for that role and playing it?
Well, the first thing I remember is how much of a Who fan I was already going into it. So I found, when I started working on it, I found sketches that I had traced out of a book from the library of Pete and Roger when I was in, I don't know, grade school or something.
Pete Townsend and Roger Daltrey from the Who. Yes,
yeah.
right.
so it was all so surreal. I was living in Los Angeles at the time, and I had gone out there to do a TV show as well, and it was the first kind of national exposure that I'd had. And so I was out there, and then that ended, and I just stayed and continued to do regional theaters based out of Los Angeles up and down the West Coast, as I had been doing before on the East Coast. And at the moment of the audition, I was in a production of Richard II at the Mark Taper Forum in a smaller role, and the audition was to go and audition for this production of Tommy, and there was no script. Nobody had any idea. Like, it sounded like it could be a disastrously bad idea to do a stage musical version of Who's Tommy. It's like one step away from, Tommy on Ice. But,
right.
But I went, and they wanted you to come in and sing a rock song of your choice, and that was the first thing. And I thought, well, I'm not gonna have a musical theater piano player accompany me on something, so I'll just bring my guitar and audition and play for myself. And it was kind of before the time where every actor has a band. Like in those days, that wasn't such a thing. And so I think...
Case in point, yes, actor with a band.
I think I was, so I came in and did played Young Americans, David Bowie's Young Americans, and that was my audition. But I didn't even know what role I was auditioning for. I was just like generally auditioning. And at some point, well into the process, before I actually realized they were considering me for Tommy. And then when I got the role, I went back to the Ken Russell movie to sort of remind myself like what Tommy does in the movie. And of course in the movie, Roger doesn't sing on camera till like the very end. Most of it's kind of in voiceover. So I didn't know what songs I would be singing or anything until the first day of rehearsal. And Pete Townsend wasn't in La Jolla until we were about to move into the theater. He wasn't there for the rehearsal process. And I remember very vividly the first time that we were going to be singing with the full band, and Pete was going to be there. And it was like a morning thing, and everybody got up early, and it was kind of like a Camp Tommy, because we were all in regional theater down in La Jolla, California, and put up in housing together and stuff. So it was like a great time. But we were all anxious and really excited to hear the band and then to meet Pete. And I was more than a little nervous and anxious about the whole thing.
You drew pictures of him as a kid, so this is obviously a big guy to you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he wasn't there at the beginning, and eventually they said, well, his flight's been delayed and he's on his way here. He's landed now, but he's still on his way here, but we have to get started, so we're just going to start. And so the first thing I sang wasn't till Amazing Journey, about 15 minutes into the show. So by that time, I'd kind of forgot that he was coming, because I got wrapped up in the excitement of hearing the band for the first time, who were amazing. And so right as I step up to the mic to sing Amazing Journey, the doors of this kind of aircraft hangar rehearsal room that we were in open, the light comes streaming in behind this tall figure of, one of the gods of rock and roll, and then I had to sing Amazing Journey. So
to Pete, as he makes his entrance.
To Pete, yes. His entrance music, basically.
His entrance music, right.
So I figured after that, I figured I can kind of handle anything. And he was great. So we did it there, and then it was a big success there, kept extending, and eventually the decision was made that they were going to take it to Broadway, but we all had to re-audition for our parts. And I had a disastrously bad re-audition, after having done the part 110 times for the very people that I was auditioning for.
Right.
So all I could do was be worse than I had been on stage.
Of course, yeah.
And I fulfilled that by having had a bad flu right before I flew out for the audition. I warmed up in the music director's apartment, who had a bunch of cats, and I didn't know it, and I'm allergic to cats. And
great.
So I basically lost my voice entirely in the middle of the audition, and it was just like the worst, all of my nightmares coming true after months of anticipating my big chance.
Right.
and so they had me stick around for a few days to see if maybe my voice was going to come back, but it wasn't that quick. And so then Pete Townsend and Des McAnuff, the director, took me out to dinner, and I thought, well, I guess this is my consolation dinner. And I mean, it's cool. I get to have dinner with Pete Townsend. That's pretty cool. And we're talking about all kinds of stuff. And at some point, Pete starts saying, so I want to bring you over to London and, spend some time with you in my studio. And, I'm working on a new solo record, and I want to play that for you and introduce you to the guys that I grew up with when Tommy was being written, and show you where the Who did or played our first gigs. I'm like, this is a pretty great consolation prize. And it wasn't until he said, I think it's great that we saw more than 1,000 guys for the role of Tommy, and we're going to give the part to the guy who gave the absolute worst audition out of all of them.
And there it was.
That was my first clue that I was actually going to be on Broadway. And and then I did get to go to London and do all that with Pete, and he was great. He said, I can't tell you how to act. I can't teach you how to act this, but I can teach you how to be a rock star. So, I got rock star coaching from Pete Townsend.
You went to rock star summer camp with Pete Townsend,
did.
Which is a pretty good place to take it.
Yeah.
So you do that gets you started on Broadway. Then a few years later, you win your first Tony Award for playing John Wilkes Booth in Assassins.
Right.
Dark character.
Yeah. I seem to specialize in dark characters. I don't know if it's something I just put out there in the world, or or work out all my aggressions in that.
I was going to say, between that, Sweeney Todd, Hedwig and the Angry Inch is a pretty intense character.
Yeah.
Some of the folks you've played on TV have been pretty intense characters.
Yeah.
So you're the go-to guy for the.
Yeah. I mean, I do think I've always. Since I was little, I always was fascinated by the monsters in stories, and I always kind of sided with the monsters. I always felt like, Frankenstein didn't ask to be stitched together like that, and he didn't understand that the little girl wasn't like the flowers that they were throwing in the water, and King Kong didn't ask to be dragged off the island where he was perfectly happy and had a lovely little life. So I always sort of saw things a little from the monster's side, and that's essentially what the actor's job is, to fight your character's point of view and leave the writer and the director to sort of make the appropriate commentary on that point of view. But when you're playing John Wilkes Booth, you argue the truth from his eyes, and when you're working with something like that, where you have such brilliant writers as Stephen Sondheim and John Weidman, you can invest yourself fully in trying to explain the world from that character's point of view, and trust that it's not going to be misconstrued or misappropriated later. And so I think if I have anything that kind of explains why I've done a lot of those roles, I think it's because I try to. Nobody believes they're the villain. Everybody believes they're the hero of their story, and their actions are justified for whatever complicated and sometimes completely misguided reasons. And so that's kind of where I maybe invest a little more heart and humanity into these people, not trying to mask their evil choices, but to kind of argue for, I guess, trying to argue that we're not so different from them, and we need to understand if we want to progress as people, we need to recognize that we share that humanity and then figure out what went wrong.
Exactly. If you're just tuning in, my guest here is Michael Cerveris, Broadway actor, TV actor, does a bunch of different things. Winning that first Tony, I imagine, for Best Actor in a Musical, that was a career boost, obviously, and it helps you get work. Obviously it leads to more things. And then you won a second one for the production of Fun Home in 2015. Which was a different kind of role for you there as well. You were playing Bruce Bechtel from, is it Alison Bechtel's
Alison Bechdel,
memoir?
Yeah.
So closeted gay father You also had hair, as you can see on the screen right
did,
there. I see that.
Yes.
That's
not unlike yours, actually.
yeah. Wow.
I'm thinking,
Wow, you kind of played me. Except for the closet part.
I
but
don't want
yes.
to, I'm not going to pry.
But again, that was what, 10 years after you won the Tony prior. So again, it's maybe like you gone a number of years and okay, here's another nice little boost that came at the right time.
Yeah, and it's funny because the first time around, I'd been nominated for Tommy and didn't win, and in a lot of ways, always felt like that was kind of a blessing because I went through all of the fun and the anxiousness of that whole process, but then immediately had it put kind of back into perspective. Like I didn't win, and my life didn't change. I still was doing a great job that I loved doing, and I was kind of my focus was put back on the thing that really matters the most, which is the work itself. And so the next time I was nominated, which was for Assassins, I went into it with a much different headspace and just sort of like I know what it's like to lose. So if that's what happens, I can do that, and I still will have a good time. And my expectations were a lot lower. I do remember that I was telling myself actively. There was another actor nominated, a friend of mine, that I was nominated with, named Michael McElroy, and I just kept reminding myself, do not stand up if you just hear Michael, because it might not be you, and that would really be embarrassing.
Oh man!
So, so when I won, it was kind of, it was a surprise and a thrill, but really disorienting, and I remember my major feeling was just kind of gratitude and wanting to share that feeling of being just acknowledged for what you do. I mean, that's really the only significant part of anything like that. It's just somebody going, hey, we saw what you did, we thought it was good.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's nothing wrong with enjoying that. I mean, that's
right.
a good thing. That's a good thing.
And then the second one for Fun Home, that I think in some ways meant a little more because I'd worked so hard for that. Not that I hadn't worked for everything before that, but Fun Home on every level, artistically, creatively, socially, in terms of the impact for the audience and doing something that you felt was actually making a real positive influence in the world. To be acknowledged for being a part of that felt even more valuable, I think.
Absolutely, I can see that, absolutely. You've had a house here in New Orleans for more than a decade at this point, right? Let's see.
Yeah, well, I first came here in 2007. I've had the place since, actually, yeah, it's like 12 years, 11 or 12 years now.
Being down here, I imagine good creatively for you in a lot of regards, but the band, your band called Loose Cattle, you and Kimberly Kay front this band, roughly Americana in the broadest sense, I guess.
Yeah.
What was the original concept of the band, and how much of your rock star camp with Pete Townsend are you able to apply to it?
Well, it's really interesting because I've always had such a specific idea of what a musician is from my dad, from watching him. To this day, he's been retired for years and he's in his 80s, but he still practices and plays piano for several hours a day. And that kind of dedication and mastery of the instrument and knowledge of theory and everything else, I didn't have and don't have. I still don't really read music. I can kind of follow along with a vocal part, but I struggle reading charts half the time because I'm just a self-taught musician, really. And I was joking with somebody over at Euclid Records the other day, saying, I basically just put myself in the room with real musicians and then lower them to my degree of ability.
Well, you're an actor. You can fake it. You can fake being a musician. Come on.
But I've always been more self-conscious as a musician. Like and especially with my own writing, and Kimberly and I have been writing this new record that we just finished and have mastered and everything else, just haven't gotten out yet. But we wrote almost every song on this record, and we've been writing more and more over the past few years. But we both had been in bands she was in a bunch of punk bands and ska bands in New Jersey, where she grew up, and I'd played guitar with Bob Mould, and I've always been like a big rock and roll guy. And when Kimberly and I were dating at the time, and somehow I'd never read a rock biography and thought, oh yeah, having a band together with your partner is like a good way to get along better and argue less.
Always is. Yep. So, Fleetwood Mac, perfect example.
We apparently never learned anything from Fleetwood Mac. So the relationship ended, and we figured out that we were much better suited to be just musical partners and very best friends. But we'd had these bands, we were trying to do original music and stuff, and it was always so much work, and by the time you actually got on stage to do the part you really wanted to do, which was just be with your friends and make music, you were kind of exhausted by the effort of getting there. So we were like, right, we're starting this band, we're going to have no expectations, we're going to play in people's living rooms, we're going to play covers of stuff, we'll do country stuff because I come from West Virginia, and she was always a fan of that music, and then sort of from her writing past, interested in the narrative kind of stuff of country music. So it'll just be fun. We'll never rehearse, we'll just show up with charts. And we started that, and pretty quickly got chances to play on Mountain Stage on NPR and this American Songbook series at Lincoln Center. And the kinds of things you work towards for years as a band were kind of falling in our laps, and we're like, well, maybe we should actually rehearse maybe and take it more seriously. And so that's how it's developed. And then once we moved down, I had moved down here a while ago, and then Kim got married and married down here, and became based down here. So then the band became based down here, and that's when we got Renee Coman and Doug Garrison from the Iguanas, and Rurik Noonan, who's plays fiddle in pretty much every band in town, and it became a real New Orleans-based band. And in the past several years, it's really kind of found its stride, I think.
Absolutely. No, it's a lot of fun. I encourage everyone to go check it out, look in the listings for when it's playing, and I hope we get to see you back on screen and on stage sometime soon.
You and me both, because this house here is not paying for itself.
There you go. All right. Well, this has been a lot of fun, Michael. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Keith.
All right. Once again, everybody, this has been Let's Talk. I'm Keith Spera. We'll see you again next week.